So there's a better way to boost business. Tariffs and industry carve-outs are a poor solution, and they'll likely have a lot of carve-outs just like they did during the first Trump administration. We need policies that promote U.S. innovation, reduce the regulations, and prevent price hikes. Hello, welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. Look, we've got a lot of stuff going on. It's April now. Can you believe it? Another month has passed in March. Hopefully you had a great March. You'll have even a better April. Remember, you can find all the show notes and even more information at vanceginn.com. You can also get my newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. But with all that, let's get into it, all right? It's a big week for tariffs as President Trump has announced a series of tariffs set to take effect on April 2nd. There could even be some auto manufacturing tariffs on vehicles that you purchase from overseas of 25% that could go into effect on April 3rd. So there's a lot that's happening, especially as I'm recording this. With federal income taxes already on our minds this month, as it is tax month, we have tax day on April 15th. Don't forget that. These tariffs are another tax on American consumers and families. It's something that we've really got to make sure that we're keeping in touch with and understand how this could affect all of us. Speaking of taxes, we're still awaiting the renewal of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, known as the Trump tax cuts, before they expire at the end of this year. Remember, all those individual income taxes that you are paying lower tax rates expire at the end of this year. There's some other things as well that are important that should be looked at, but that's one of the biggest things because it affects our budgets of how much money we have in our pockets to put food on the table, pay for loans, pay off credit cards, and a whole bunch of other things that will really affect that. So will the Republican-led Congress manage to make these tax cuts permanent? One would hope, but there's still a lot of discussion that's going on and a lot of gamesmanship and everything else. But at the end of the day, I think that they need to be focused on lower tariffs and getting rid of tariffs and more on these Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, making them permanent, extending them where they can, and maybe even making it better. I would rather not narrow out and pick winners and losers within the tax code, of course, but there are other places where they could be making strides in the right direction. There's also a lot of things going on at the states on income taxes, property taxes, and much, much more. I was recently in Des Moines, Iowa, speaking at the Iowans for Tax Relief Foundation, along with the NFIB organization there, about Iowa and how it's really been a conservative leader, not only in some spending restraint, they could do better there, but there has been more spending restraint than some other places. But their path to eliminating income taxes is already underway. They're already reducing it down substantially, having a flat tax rate now. They've also been deregulating. I mean, in fact, Governor Kim Reynolds has made Doge, she's basically said that Doge was cool there before Doge was created at the federal level. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. We have states like Iowa, North Carolina, Tennessee, and some others that are out there that are leading the way for the conservative, the fiscal conservative cause or case for allowing for more economic growth and prosperity. That's really the direction that we need to go. So let's go ahead and get into the key things for today. Number one big, beautiful bill. That's what we've heard so much about. Well, in the news, a Republican-led Congress is working to pass a one big, beautiful bill that includes key parts of President Trump's agenda, such as tax cuts, border security, energy policy, and government efficiency plans. My take on this is that there is some good to this. I mean, we need to make sure that these tax cuts remain permanent. There's a lot of discussion about how to score this baseline, current policy or present policy versus current law, and whether or not what this is going to look like over a 10-year window. And while I understand the somewhat of a need for looking at what the longer term effects are of these budget decisions, we've also got to remember that every dollar that the Congress passes to spend and every dollar that they tax are discretionary from year to year. Yes, they could put timelines on it and everything else, but if there's the political courage, if there's the political will to do things, they can make things done. So I think we actually should get away from this 10-year budget planning. Really, that's what this is. It becomes a Chinese Communist Party sort of planning, because not only are the estimates that they put in there wrong, as someone who helped write President Trump's last budget and working with Troika and looking at the economic effects of a 10-year budget window and the last budget that President Trump put out in for fiscal year 2021, I think what we see is that, or what I found was that there's just so much uncertainty. There's a lot of gamesmanship. political gamesmanship to get certain amounts to hit targets that you want instead of just letting the economy work. Remember, government should be a referee, not an active player in the economy. And so the way that we're doing budgeting today is broken. It's a ridiculous form. No state does this. And so I think that there's a reason to get away from this idea, because ultimately what people care about is how much money is in their pocket. And if the government is protecting their unalienable rights along with the national defense, justice system, things of that nature, the rest of it's just becoming too large. And some would say, well, yeah, but these tax cuts were temporary, so you shouldn't think about them being after that point in time. But why? Why would we want tax cuts to go away when that's more money in the pockets of people? Some will consider these tax cuts to be a cost. Cost to who? It's a cost to the government on how much they want to spend, but it's a benefit to the taxpayers who are paying for every dollar of that government spending. I think it's just a lot of beltway noise. It's a lot of talk that they like to make, but they're really not getting to the point of this, is that we already have a spending problem. We've got to make sure that that is the key thing that we're looking at. So the challenges that we're facing here is that this bill, this one big beautiful bill, faces a major hurdle, including the debate over Medicaid. Initially, the House proposed reducing Medicaid spending as part of a funding plan, but federal welfare spending should be allocated as block grants to states rather than federal mandates. Block grants would allow states to customize welfare policies to their economic needs and their needs of the people, the residents of those states. And it would avoid the pitfalls of a one-size-fits-all Washington regulations and spending that oftentimes fit no one. The ugly part about this is there's a significant issue with the House's plans to propose $4 trillion increase to the debt ceiling. This expansion of government spending contradicts Trump's goal of improving the economy and exacerbates issues like inflation. If we lead to more debt, it's more money that the Federal Reserve is likely to print as they buy a lot of those trade securities, putting more money in the economy, leading to higher interest rates and higher inflation over the longer run. That's not a situation that we need. Check out in my show notes at vanceginn.substack.com, where I discuss with Joe Pags on the Joe Pags Show about the economic strategy that's impacting your wallet out of DC. Don't miss that, okay? Number 2 in the news is that Wednesday is Tariff Day. April 2nd is shaping up to be a significant day for tariffs, with President Trump planning to impose sweeping tariffs on all of America's trading partners, possibly with some exceptions. He also indicated upcoming tariffs on automobiles, pharmaceuticals, and other industries. My take on this is that this is just another April tax day. We already have April 15th, which is when our federal income taxes are due. But now we're having to worry about another tax through tariffs. And how is this going to impact our budgets? How is this going to impact the cars that we buy, the food that we buy, and so much more? And what it's doing is leading to a lot of uncertainty. This pain may be accepted, as even President Trump has acknowledged that there's going to be some pain in what he considers to be the short term. But I worry that this will also spark long-term trade wars, further raising costs in families and businesses. Even if you have reciprocal trade where it goes up, they have a 10% tariff, and so we added 10% tariff, and they go up to 15. You see what I mean? It escalates up. I think the goal here for some, including President Trump, may be to get the tariffs down to zero. Maybe that's the goal. If you impose that same tariff, they'll be like, the other country will just say, well, I can't have this. That's too high of a tariff, so let's go down. The problem is we don't have any history of that. We don't have any evidence that that would actually work. In fact, there's led to more trade wars. And what I'm concerned about is that also can lead to military wars and, of course, make us less prosperous in the process. So there's a better way to boost business. Tariffs and industry carve-outs are a poor solution, and they'll likely have a lot of carve-outs just like they did during the first Trump administration. We need policies that promote U.S. innovation, reduce regulations, and prevent price hikes. This includes reducing the cost of doing business at home, lowering corporate taxes, lowering government spending, getting rid of tax breaks and carve-outs and picking winners and losers, and deregulating. That will allow us to do more work at home while we also have more free trade agreements with our allies. This is the process that we should go through instead of going after Canada and Mexico, China, and every other country, it seems like, in the world. Trade deficits don't matter. It's the trade volume that matters. It's the amount of voluntary exchange between people to satisfy their desires that matters. And the more the government gets involved, the more that they control our lives and what we can purchase, the less liberty we have and the less prosperity we will have. So don't miss my interview on NTD News where I discuss these trade-offs of tariffs. It's a pretty long segment, actually, where I think we went through a lot of good questions and points there that I hope you'll check out on the show notes page. Number 3, Texas's big budget. Texas likes to do everything bigger, right? That's always usually heard, and there's a lot of truth to that in a lot of ways. Well, one of those should not be the budget, should not be spending. In the news, the Texas Senate unanimously passed. This is 31-0, okay? All Democrats and all Republicans, a record high $336 billion budget over 2 years for the 26-27 biennium. This is a $71 billion increase, or 27% increase from 4 years ago. If you look at the entire budget, it's more than $40 billion, nearly $50 billion just for one budget period. So this is just a bad situation. My take is that everything's bigger in Texas. And unfortunately, that includes this budget. It's a 42.5% increase in the budget over the last 4 years. If you compare it from 2 budgets ago, this exceeds the 20%, about 20% increase in population growth and inflation over that same period. So we're growing at twice the rate with which the average taxpayer could afford. This budget looks more like a California budget than a Texas one. We've got to get back to sound budgeting, even in Texas, okay? The surplus spending spree is also run amok. There's potentially a surplus of about $24 billion and about $28 billion in the rainy day fund. We're talking about $52 billion just between those two. And there's already discussion about spending a lot of this money. One of these are for more money on government schooling, public education. We're already spending about $100 billion a year on public education between the state, local governments, and federal funds. And they're putting in place a recommendation, or they're putting it in an amount of only $1 billion, which I say only $1 billion, right? It's a lot, but $1 billion to go towards school choice for ESAs, with universal eligibility where all the kids are eligible for it. But there are restrictions on who will actually get it. And they have to put these restrictions because they're not wanting to fully fund it. They're basically saying, look, we're going to give huge handouts to government school folks and radicals on that side, saying that they want to spend more, even though outcomes continue to go down on student performance. But let's keep funding them more. Let's keep funding the monopoly beast. It's ridiculous. While they're only doing $1 billion for school choice for ESAs, which will cover about 1.5% of the 6.3 million kids across the state of Texas. This means many people will not have access. Parents will apply, but will be rejected because the state doesn't want to fund it. Now, there's an escalator for future years where if there is a wait list, that those on the wait list will be funded. But we'll see, because again, that is a discretionary part of the budget that they may or may not do in the future. I'd rather see this start off as universal in the beginning. Everyone who wants it can get access to it. Because if we don't, we are setting back what could happen to many of the kids across the state to get that education that they need. And it won't cover every single pathway. Nothing is free, but it would put it in a position where taxpayer money are going to places that are going to best meet the needs of kids and improve our student outcomes and therefore our economy and everything else, compared to the broken monopoly that we have today called government schools. So I'm hopeful that will be the case. And by the way, with all this spending, they're only looking at putting $6 billion into reducing property taxes, which is a main issue in Texas, okay? And the Senate wants to do homestead exemptions, which is a bad idea. At least the House is wanting to do reducing school M&O property tax rates because the state really controls school finance system anyway. But at the end of the day, this budget is too big, spends too much, and does too little for tax relief. So I'm hopeful that we can get back to that very soon. Don't miss my recent commentary on X, an article on X, where I outlined a roadmap for Governor Abbott to steer Texas toward a better pro-growth future for more prosperity. Don't miss that in the show notes page. Number 4, artificial intelligence in the states. In the news, artificial intelligence, AI, has become a significant issue for states this year, with many considering policies to regulate it. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin recently vetoed an AI bill that could stifle innovation and the industry. Meanwhile, Ohio is leveraging AI to drive regulatory reform, identifying unnecessary rules and saving the state 58,000 employee hours and $44 million over the next 10 years. That's just extraordinary. But you also have other places like Texas where things are not going in the right direction. I'm glad to see that these regulations were rejected in Virginia. Congrats to Governor Youngkin for seeing that this was a bad direction and vetoed that legislation. But I also hope that Governor Greg Abbott in Texas will see that there are problems with the current TREGA bill, which I've talked about before, was House Bill 1709. That bill got scrapped basically and said, okay, there was too much pushback on it. They created a new bill, House Bill 149, still by Representative Capriglione. And but this bill still has too much political discrimination bias stuff in there of trying to ban things and other discrimination efforts. It also puts too much regulation on innovation. And I think at the end of the day, it should die. This bill should die. It is better than the original one, as there's not as much discrimination and control by politicians and bureaucrats on AI and what's going on, but it still is too much, right? There's already laws in place for discrimination, by the way. And what they're trying to do is to put a greater burden on these companies and everything else instead of having responsibility of individuals where it should be. The better solution here is Texas lawmakers should consider House Bill 3808 by State Representative Brian Harrison, which is the Texas AI Freedom Act, which creates an advisory council and encourages faster innovation in labs versus trying to come in and regulate discrimination and everything else that's going on. I think that's really the way to go. Don't miss my recent op-ed at the Center Square with Logan Colas, where we wrote about the harmful AI bill, the first TREGA, and what should be considered in Texas instead. Number 5, data center bill in Texas. In the news, the Texas Senate passed a bill, it's Senate Bill 6, that could hinder data mining centers and more economic growth in Texas. The bill introduces regulations granting the state broad authority over data centers' operations and cost measures, which critics argue could lower profit margins for data centers across the state. My take is that these are costly restrictions. This bill increases government control by imposing unnecessary regulations on large consumers using over 75 megawatts of electricity, restricting competition and raising costs. It could even force businesses to supply electricity to the state grid and potentially have their power turned off via a kill switch when the state needs more electricity. This violates private property. This violates what's going on in a state like Texas that should have free market capitalism. And it violates the idea that we live in scarcity versus abundance. There's plenty of energy out there. It's just that we're not tapping into it because we have so many subsidies and tax breaks from the federal government, from state government, from local government that's setting the stage for where electricity and energy production should go instead of letting the markets work. Let prices allocate these resources. That would be much better. So my top concern is that SB 6 creates government barriers that can reduce competition, leading to higher prices for AI, technology, and electricity overall. This will harm prosperity in the state of Texas. What we need is true energy abundance. And if we do that, if we focus on the abundance side, then we can deal with some of these other things that come along the way. Don't miss my piece, my quote actually in Fox News, where I put a link to that in the show notes, and my recent piece in the Dallas Morning News commentary. It talks all about this and really gets into the details. I'll be talking more about how this could also influence the national security threats if we're up to that as well. So that's a big issue right now going on in Texas, and it's an effort to see what happens in other states. I think that's why there's been more and more of an outcry of what's happening in Senate Bill 6 that wasn't getting any attention at first. But now it really is, because if Texas goes down this route, and some states are already saying ban data mining centers and everything else, this could be a bad direction. I mean, data mining is really what goes into all of our data that we use on a day-to-day basis, okay? Whether it's in your phone, whether it's in your computer, whether it's in your car, this is all going into that. And while we may fear it to some capacity, as some of you might, doesn't mean we need to start banning things. Let the markets work. Profit and loss really does work. And I think if we leave them up to that, we'll be in a much better situation. Number 6, states seek tax cuts. In the news, many states are exploring tax cuts or eliminating certain taxes this legislative session. South Carolina and Georgia are pursuing plans to cut income taxes and put them on a path to elimination. Florida lawmakers seek to address rising home costs by considering legislation cutting or even eliminating property taxes. My take on this is that tax cuts are worth celebrating. Come on. We need more money in people's pockets and less money in government. And we also need to make sure we tie this to sustainable budgeting, where the budget does not grow by more than population plus inflation. In fact, it should be much lower than that if it grows at all. I'd like to see it cut. Now we have more room for tax relief. I also think we got to focus on income tax cuts, okay? Lower income taxes, making them flat and getting on the path to zero by using surplus buy downs. You limit spending, you put any of the extra money that comes in from taxpayers, you give it back to them by lowering rates, not through other things. Income tax elimination should come first before your other types of taxes. But there are a lot of problems with property taxes too, which I think are as much, if not more, burdensome in many cases on people, especially lower income people, on those property taxes. And of course, if as long as you have a property tax, you never get to rent. You never get to own your property. You rent from the government forever. Even as you pay off your mortgage, you still got to pay that rent. And that rent to the government, that taxes, those property taxes, end up being more than the mortgage payments ever were. And this is a major problem, not only in Texas, North Dakota, Florida. And I'm glad to see that there's more of an effort heading in this direction. My big concern is that you focus on the worst taxes first. If you can, eliminate income taxes first before you even get to property taxes. That's why in some of the states that I work with, like Wyoming, Texas, and some others on paths to eliminating property taxes, start there because they don't have an income tax now. And so when you do that, that can lead to some other issues. And where does the revenue going to come from to replace the income of the income taxes or the property taxes? Mostly be sales taxes. Moving in that direction allows for more efficient efficient tax, less bureaucracy, that sort of thing, and allows for you to pay it whenever you want to spend money versus your income taxed or your property being taxed or savings being taxed. And taxing consumption can actually lead to faster economic growth. I'm not saying that any tax leads to growth, but what it does is it incentivizes more savings compared to consumption, and savings drives more economic growth from investment and everything over time. So every tax has a cost. There's always this burden. Nothing is free in that sense. And the spending is the main problem. If you don't limit that at the state, local, and even federal levels, we're never going to get our taxes under control. All right. Check out my recent episode, The Let People Prosper Show with Grover Norquist, where we discussed this and a lot more. Thank you for joining me in this week's Economy. For more insights, visit vanceginn.com and get even greater value with a paid subscription or a complimentary subscription to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. Until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.